Hello, everyone, and welcome to Medherosnet Podcast Season 3, Episode 20. We are live on YouTube and Facebook. It is Thursday, March 20th, 2023. I'm your host, Vik Aslanyan, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Mr. Mike Balyan, where we discuss our great Armenian history, covering different eras, topics, and people. Please hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed and share with your friends and family. Get them here. Join the live chat. Don't be shy. Our special guest, returning, Dr. Gevorg Nazarian, live in the studio with us.
Where's the applaud button, man?
Right here. Huh? There we go.
It works.
Today's topic of conversation is going to be the Armenian question. This is a very serious topic that we discussed about, that we need to talk about this. It's very important because it kind of ties into what we covered last time with you, which was the First Republic. And then next week, we're going to be talking about the Armenian American, right? Which this all kind of works together. How are you, by the way?
I'm doing great. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. How are you been adjusting and getting used to the American? Because you're from here,
Right,
obviously.
right.
You were gone for 7 years. It's like almost going to Back to the Future type of a situation. Have you gotten used to how different things have become?
Yeah, I kind of did. Vic. First of all, thank you again for having me back. Great to be here with such great friends. Yeah, it's just kind of normal. I got used to it, and then like you said, it's just basically reconnecting in many ways, but with friends and family.
Of course, yeah.
So it's kind of like business and pleasure at the same time. But yeah, it's okay. It's going. It's
Good.
Yeah.
All right, that's good. I want to thank everybody who is joining us live in the chat. Guys, feel free to converse and
Who said I matched the wall?
Oh, yeah. She's right. You do. If you guys, while we're having the conversation, feel free to ask any questions and then we'll pass them on to Gevorg. But before we start the topic, always as announcements, 2 weeks ago, we went to an event at put together by the Armenian Film Society, which was about the powerful Armenian women in the entertainment industry, and it was a great event here in Glendale. We went to, and they had these really amazing women who are so successful in the industry, and we were both surprised from their life stories that they told. They had an actress, they had a few people who are producers, directors, being in the show industry, but we were really impressed. We were actually looking forward to meet the founder, Armen Karolanian. I'm sorry if I butchered that, Armenian. It's a long last name, but I connected with him via email, and I am excited to announce that he will be. Armenian Film Society. It's a great organization, by the way. If you guys don't know about them, go follow him on Instagram, and they are celebrating 100 years of Armenian film, which is a big deal. You're talking about going back to 1923, when they first started doing Armenian film. But we're going to have him on the show, and we're going to talk about the history of Armenian film, hopefully sometime in April. But I wanted to give him a shout out. We appreciate they actually started helping us to promote the event. But yeah, that's the exciting part. And they're really doing great thing, trying to bring young Armenian creatives who want to be in the industry, bring our stories to the forefront. So
There's a movement. It's happening.
Yeah, it's all coming together. It's really good.
It's really happening.
I want to mention, guys, last show we told you that the prices of the sculptures are going to go up. So if you guys still interested, please go to medherosno.com, use the promo code Artsakh. You'll get 10% off, and then we'll match that and give it to the foundation of Support Our Heroes, which we're really good friends with them. We're helping them out. And then I want to talk about our event coming up. Meta Talk event. This is the first, panel discussion that we're going to be doing. And we titled it Exploring the Cradle of Civilization because obviously Armenian Highlands is such an important part of where, everything kind of began as far as domestication and so forth, But thank you to everybody who's purchased your tickets, by the way. We're getting close to about 150 tickets or so, but we still have much room, and I need everybody to join the movement and get your tickets, guys. I know it's a bad habit for Armenians to wait to do this last minute, but go get your tickets. Seriously. We want to see everybody there. We waste so much money on things that, I get it, parties, concerts, that's all great. We want to do that, but this is a lot more important. We've been wasting so much time on concentrating on these fun pleasures that we all want to have, but while doing that, it is affecting what is happening right now. So you need to be there. If you're local, if you're in LA, I know people who are coming from San Diego. So if they can do it, then you guys need to do it. Don't wait. And let me bring up the
heck, we have a couple people coming out of state, dude.
Yeah, that's right. The QR code, you guys can scan that QR code and get your tickets, but this is the one that will be on the screen. Go get them. It's $20 a ticket. If you're going to buy more than two, use promo code TAMAT and you'll get half off. So $10.
Come on down and get educated.
It's a Thursday night. Thursday nights are the new Fridays. So make sure you come down. We got drinks that are going to be served by crystal bartenders. We have finger food that's going to go along with the wine. We have Armenian coffee that's going to be served. We're going to have Armenian music being played. There's a pianist, a young lady who's going to be playing some great music. We're going to have a couple of kiosks set up. So it's going to be a great event, and then you'll get to watch us on stage and have Gevor present this amazing information. So again, very important. I want to see everybody there. So go get your tickets, guys. That's an order.
Just come hang out. Just come hang out. Trust me. It's going to be fun.
Besides that, you guys want to start?
Sure.
Let's take a vote.
Let's take a vote. Who wants to start the conversation? All right.
Damn, I got outvoted again, guys.
Yeah. Well,
democracy wins.
So last episode before that, when you were here, we talked about the First Republic of Armenia, which was very, very interesting. It really shined a light of a lot of things that we didn't know about, and our audience as well. So today, again, we're going to talk about the Armenian question. Now, the Armenian question, as far as being presented on the international stage, was first in the year of 1978. I'm sorry, 1878. I apologize, 1878. But there's a history behind that. So what are the origins of the Armenian question?
Absolutely. Well, exactly, Vic, you rightly pointed out that we talked about the First Republic of Armenia, but basically the backdrop to the establishment of the First Republic is definitely the period that we're going to just cover, which is the period known as the Armenian question. But like you rightly pointed out, we have to put this all in context. The Armenian question, basically, you can say it began as an international question, and we will cover that as a topic of international politics in 1878, as you rightly pointed out. However, we can say that the origin of the Armenian question actually goes back to the time when we lost our statehood, when we lost our last state, the Kingdom of Armenia, in the 14th or 15th century. That is the Cilician Armenian Kingdom, which, as we talked about in the Cilician Armenia
and the last
episode,
king was Levon
the sixth, depends how you count. It's basically Levon the Fifth as a king, but since we had a prince, Levon the First, sometimes it's also referred to as Levon the Sixth. So it's the same thing. It just depends how you count. But you're absolutely right. But even a little bit after that, until the 15th century, the Cilician Armenian kingdom existed in the coastal area of the Mediterranean and mountainous Cilicia. And it's actually very important, Vic, because in that area, semi-independent Armenian local autonomy existed even after the fall of the Kingdom of Armenia. Because remember, we did talk about this in the Cilician Armenia episode, that formally it was always Kingdom of Armenia, even in Cilician Armenia, right? Because that was the Armenia that we knew as an independent state. That was our last state until Armenian independence was re-established in 1918 as a republic already, which was obviously our first republic. So the mountainous Cilician Armenia is important because the last vestiges of Armenian autonomy continued to exist even after the 15th century in mountainous Armenia. An important such stronghold was actually Zeitun. But there were also other Armenian such mountainous autonomous areas in other parts of Armenia, without a doubt. For example, in Syunik, in Artsakh, in parts of Sasun, Taron, for example. So after the fall of the Kingdom of Armenia, our last independent state, Armenian elites, Armenian aristocracy and high-ranking clergy, they always wanted to reestablish Armenian independence. So there wasn't a time, there wasn't a century in Armenian history, starting in the 15th century, that there were no serious attempts by the Armenian elites to reestablish Armenian independence, which, I mean, speaks a lot, right? I mean, our people yearned for independence, for freedom, for having to see Armenian state, Armenian independence once again restored. It speaks volumes. And I don't want to get too much into that because you will cover that when we come to the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century.
No spoilers.
Definitely, you will cover that in detail. I don't want to cover that now, and it would take up a lot of time. You will do that in detail. You're doing a great job, by the way.
Thank you.
So, so you will talk about the Israel Oris, the David Beks, the Mechitar Sparapets in due time. That's like 17th, 18th century. But in the 19th century, especially, you can say that the national liberation movement for Armenia really picked up. It is also a time when various powers came into play, for example, in Eastern Armenia, and even a little bit even before that. For example, Napoleon, of all the people, he, at the end of the 18th century, he fought against the Ottomans, and he had a number of successful campaigns in Egypt. He defeated the Ottomans in Egypt. And believe it or not, Napoleon, the famous Napoleon, he actually, exactly. He sympathized with the Armenian people. He even sent several envoys to the Armenians and said that, I'm fighting the Ottomans, but I see that your people are also subjugated. And, I look forward for the time that your people will also be liberated. Because, sometimes he's portrayed as this emperor and this sort of like...
Sometimes vilified. He has been vilified.
But in all honesty, he always said that, I'm just spreading the Republican ideas of the French Revolution. Equality, freedom, liberty, justice. He really believed himself to be this enlightened emperor. He was fighting the tyranny and despotism. This is how he viewed himself, and maybe other people as well. I mean, definitely among Armenians, he also had sympathizers. We had the famous, the Venice Mechitarist congregation, right? The Brotherhood of the Mechitarist Fathers. He actually was very supportive of them in Venice. When he was closing down even other monasteries throughout Italy, through special charter, he established that the Mechitarist congregation in Venice on the island of San Lazzaro, or Subkhazar, as we say in Armenian, is actually an academy of sciences. It's an Armenian academy of sciences. It's not just a monastery. And he was right, because our great Mechitarist fathers, starting from 1717, is when Mechitar Sebastatsi, you'll talk about him as well later on. I don't want to get
You're giving away our episodes.
Exactly. Look at it as like little teasers, breadcrumbs, and then eventually we're going to elaborate.
Absolutely,
Season 5.
absolutely. But he like, I mean, you definitely, you cover that.
That's interesting that Napoleon had some sort of small play with some little morsel of Armenian.
Oh yeah. He was very well educated. He knew, for example, Armenian history, which is quite amazing. And not only Armenian history, he was just a well-read man, Napoleon.
Well, I mean, you have to be.
Yeah. He was really an enlightened, ruler, as you say, enlightened despot. Sometimes they called him, and then in the 19th century also, an important events were taking place. As we know, Russia was also expanding. So in early 19th century, took over the Eastern Armenia. It conquered it from the Persians, from Iran, from the Iranian Shahs. And then, and at the same time, the Ottoman Empire was also weakening. So, as we know, most of Armenians continued to live under the Ottomans, and you also covered that period also in how the Ottomans
the Ottomans weren't liked by too many people.
Right, and the reason they weren't liked, Mike, it wasn't just
being nice.
No, but that had specific purpose. You see, the Ottoman Empire, by its own setup, it was a caliphate. Yes. That is to say, the Sultan, he was guided by the laws of the caliphate, by the Sharia law. So although he purported to be the Sultan of all his subjects, but obviously Christian subjects, such as the Armenians, weren't treated equally as the Muslim subjects.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it was a theocracy.
Yes. Yeah.
It was Armenians lived as second-class subjects, not even citizens, of the Sultan, who was the caliph. So when Armenians had grievances, is because of these inequality and injustice, which was built into the whole Sultanate system, the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
It wasn't a state, a modern state that we would picture today, right? Yeah. Everyone is equal before the law. No, everyone was not equal before the law. For example, there was the Sharia law. Christians were subject to special different laws, and this already created sort of inequality and injustice.
Yeah.
And throughout the Ottoman, throughout Western Armenia, or those other parts where Armenians lived, I mean, Armenians faced a lot of problems because of these injustices. Maybe the Armenians of Constantinople, which was the capital of the Ottoman Empire, fared a little bit better. There was even an influential, very small, very tiny Armenian elite known as the Amiras, and later a professional class of Armenian high-ranking craftsmen, the Esnafs, also developed in the 19th century. However, we have to realize that was a very, very tiny percent of Armenian population. Yeah. We're talking about maybe 200 families of Amiras. That's it.
Wow.
When the population of Armenians throughout the Ottoman Empire was in millions, right?
That's nothing.
So that's nothing. Yeah. I mean, the reason I bring this up, sometimes the Turks would bring the examples of the Amiras and would say, oh, look how Armenians did so well in the Ottoman Empire, you know? But I'm sorry, that wasn't even a percentile. That's not even a percent of the Armenians.
200 families, average family, 4 people.
It's a joke.
It's a joke.
It's an absolute joke. Because back then it was the families.
Okay, I'm just
right. It does it's nothing, right? Yes. The rest of the Armenians living in Western Armenia and Ottoman Empire, they were constantly harassed. Constantly, for example, the local Muslim neighbors would actually harass them, rob them, do these wanton actions that were outside of the law. They were never held up because the local judge was the local mufti.
I was about
to say. That was the judge. I mean, there was no separation of church and state in the Ottoman Empire.
Inside job.
It was one and the same, right? Yeah. The reason I point this out, all of this kind of like already facilitated the need for at least to have reforms throughout Western Armenia, that, you know, these injustices, these persecution of the Armenians cannot continue.
Yeah.
I mean, unfortunately, even the local, oftentimes the Kurds were instigated by the Ottoman sultans to attack the Armenians. And the Kurds, I mean, unfortunately, they would say, okay, we're Muslims and the Ottoman sultan is also a Muslim. So they, unfortunately, oftentimes these various Kurdish tribes, they did go along with this agenda and instigation against the Armenians.
Yeah, of course. I'm sure there were certain incentives.
Yeah,
Of course.
You're not just going to tell them and they're going to go do it. There's going to be something in it for them, and
when we had the episode with
we've known this throughout the past.
he talked about it. You know,
Yes.
like it was all about some way to entice them to understand. Like, you know, if you get rid of him, you get their
Yes.
house, you
Yeah,
get
they
their
were
goal.
definitely-
it was the incentive program.
Yeah.
Here's your
Yep.
commission.
absolutely.
I mean, I wouldn't even call it a commission. I would call it a life changing.
Right.
Right. You know.
Yeah. I mean, there were some instances, unfortunately, later on, this was less and less, when some Kurdish tribes did ally themselves with the Armenians and they would even fight the regular Ottoman army.
Yeah.
But this was mostly before in the first half and maybe mid 19th century. In the second half of the 19th century, with the rise of Abdul Hamid II, he specifically targeted the Kurds and recruited them to attack the Armenians. And we will cover that more. But I want to point out there were instances of Armenian Kurdish collaboration against the Ottomans. But unfortunately, later on, most of the Kurdish chieftains, they went along with the Ottoman Sultan's agenda. And later on, many of these sultans would actually admit and say, you know, we were wrong.
Yeah.
Because we were basically used by the Ottomans.
Yeah.
And then what did we gain at the end? After they were done with the Armenians, they started targeting us.
Yeah. Yes.
When we killed off the Armenians.
This is very common of them. If anybody knows their history deep and well enough, that they almost sort of played both sides, right? The saying goes, "The devil will take you places and will drop you right when This is how they played their cards,
right?
And it's well known. Authors have written about this. I forget which one. I don't know. Maybe you can help me with this. But there were certain authors back in the 16th, 17th centuries that spoke ill of the Ottoman advance.
Absolutely.
Tons of them.
Absolutely.
And it was the same thing over and over again about how it wasn't just about slaughtering people. It was the way they lied, the way they were so treacherous towards even people that they governed.
But what's funny is, like, knowing about those lies, they kept falling for it.
I mean, but to those, look, I'm not trying to be an apologist, but to those people's defense, at that point, when you have, let's just say that they were a tyrannical governing force, you have to capitulate to an extent to survive. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they almost felt like they'll take anything they can get.
Yeah.
With the
Even
hope,
though they might
with the
know
hope
that this is a trap.
The hope of getting out of this someday, somehow. Right?
Knowing that there's a high chance of it being a trap, that they're going to use them and then throw them away. They still went along with it because of the hope.
And they were such a big, heavy force in such a vast area.
Yeah.
You couldn't just say, oh, well, they're just occupying our city. No, they're occupying insane amounts of land.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I want to thank everybody who's joining us live on YouTube and Facebook. Thank you, guys. We are live in the studio with Dr. Gevorg Nazarian, and we're talking about the Armenian question. That is our main topic.
Now, I'm sure during this turmoil time, the Armenians, like you mentioned, were some of the more noble folk, clergymen and whatnot. They had to have gotten together and formed some sort of coalition, something, right? Something where they had an agenda. They had some sort of message to give or something to be able to. Was there some sort of, let's say, formed Armenian national constitution or something like this? Was there some group, something that was a movement or with a name or anything like this?
Oh, yes, there was, Mike. That's a great question. So basically, by mid-19th century, things were taking a different course. And also, I would have to say, with a lot of like European pressure also on the Ottomans, by, let's say, 1860, even France, for example, at this time, Napoleon III was ruling in France. He was also big on protecting the Christian communities of the Ottoman Empire. He actually took concrete steps in protecting, first and foremost, the Christians of Lebanon. That happened in early 1860s, known as the Maronites. They were the Catholic Christian community of Lebanon. So there were clashes with them in 1860-61, and Napoleon III actually issued an edict saying that their rights have to be protected. This is also the time, as you rightly pointed out, that the Armenian community of Constantinople came up with a new Armenian national constitution, which again was kind of designed to protect the rights of the Armenians of Western Armenia and throughout the Ottoman Empire, including the capital Constantinople and other parts. It was also an important milestone in Armenian history, the Armenian National Constitution, which was, as I said, was to regulate the life and the affairs of the Armenian community of the Ottoman Empire. That was introduced in 1860, but came into effect and was recognized by the Sultan in 1863.
Oh wow! So there was 3 years. So there was basically like 3 years of discussion or something like this.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm sure it was met with a lot of resistance.
It was. So like the Sultan obviously kind of also did not initially want to accommodate it, but under pressure by the Europeans, he did go along. And interestingly enough, like remember I also talked about the fact that mountainous Cilicia remained a semi-independent place, especially the city of Zeitun in mountainous Cilicia was actually ruled from those old times when the Cilician kingdom had fallen by local Armenian lords who were actually called Ishkhans, lords. There were 4 major Ishkhans, 4 like powerful Armenian aristocratic families that ruled Zeitun, and it had like semi-autonomy. So an important thing, for example, like they paid like annual tax to the Sultan, and he did not interfere in the local affairs of the Zeitun and adjoining Armenian areas of the mountainous Cilicia. This is again, as you know, very impregnable area in the Taurus Mountains, and even after the fall of our last kingdom, this is where a lot of our elites had retreated to this area, and they even had kings crowned after Levon V in this area. A number of kings were even crowned throughout the 15th century as kings of Armenia. So it was a vestige of this last Armenian kingdom. And Zeitun became the symbol of Armenian freedom or Armenian. So in 1862, the Ottomans again tried to sort of enforce harsher measures in Zeitun, which ended up with a resistance there.
Yeah.
And this is very important. Why in Zeitun? Not only the area was impregnable, not only it was locally ruled by Armenian lords known as the Ishkhans, these 4 Ishkhans, just as importantly, we have to remember in Zeitun, the Armenians of Zeitun were warlike and always they carried their firearms at their side. So imagine, guys, when most of Western Armenians were disarmed and the Armenians were, by these Sharia laws, were not even allowed to carry arms when their neighboring Kurds were allowed to carry arms. These Kurds, these Kurds often use that. And this is why, compared to the Kurds, often Armenians were not able to properly defend themselves because they were not allowed to carry arms. But in Zeitun, the Sultan, within this self-autonomy of Armenia, he could not disarm the Zeitun Armenians. And the Zeitun Armenians actually had amazing, great gunsmiths who actually made muskets, who actually made gunpowder, who actually even made cannons. Metallurgy and gunsmiths, Mike. So the locally Armenians of Zeitun, they were armed with weapons that they actually manufactured themselves. So, they relied on their own firearms, which were produced. So imagine how powerful, so Zeitun was this important Armenian stronghold. In Armenian, it's often has been referred to as the eagle's nest, Artsvabuin Zeitun. Artsvabuin Zeitun. So it was a very important place. And in 1862, there was this important resistance of Zeitun, which for the Armenian national liberation movement ushered in this new era of the Armenian national liberation. And this is a watershed moment, the 1862 resistance of Zeitun, when the Armenian, 500, 600 Zeitunis fought thousands and thousands of Ottoman troops. And interestingly enough, believe it or not, the Zeitunis were smart enough. They were actually joined by local Muslim elements as well. So some local Muslims who weren't happy with the central authorities of the Ottoman Sultans, they actually fought this time around with the Armenians against the Ottoman Sultan. So they were smart enough. So this wasn't like just clear-cut Armenians versus Turks. It was against struggle for freedom against tyranny of the Sultan. And the Zeitunis brilliantly also had allies that supported them, Kurds, Turks, and other local. So
it's interesting that the Kurd dynamic is really interesting when you think about it, right? It's because there's probably a faction of them that were paid with incentives and with future incentives, and then there was a faction of them that had loyalties to the local Armenians.
At the end of the day, Mike, it was always like the chieftain that decided. So certain chieftains went along with the agenda, were bribed, and were on the payroll of the Sultan. So those tribes, Kurdish tribes that did massacre, killed, attacked, looted, plundered, etc., and later on, of course, were involved in the Armenian Genocide, they were paid off by the Sultan directly. And the Young Turks. Those Kurds that did not, obviously, they saw the scheme. For example, the Zazas and others, various other formations, they were very much sympathetic to the Armenians. And not to mention that some of them were basically Kurdified Armenians that remembered their origins even back then. They knew that, they had Armenian ancestry. Yeah. So Kurds were this it's an umbrella term. We can't just say all the Kurds,
Now, was this liberation movement that you talked about, was it just from the Zeitun side? Or was there other, factions or something that kind of joined this development in the mid-19th century?
That's a question. For example, in mountainous Cilicia, there were also important such Armenian strongholds, such as Hajan. The city of Hajan, that's another important stronghold. So there were several such Armenian cities, although technically, oftentimes, for example, because of the distance and the Taurus Mountain as the landscape, they couldn't clearly communicate with each other. So it was like pockets of resistance. Okay. Incidentally, at that same time in Van, there was also an Armenian resistance earlier in 1862. But, that was kind of like a not as important in terms of the Zeitun resistance. And believe it or not, when the Zeitunis held out for a very long time, it was again Napoleon III that interfered and pressured the Sultan to stop the siege of Zeitun. So it ended up with.
What was his thing behind Napoleon being involved and stopping that?
Right.
Did he have a hand? Not a hand. Did he have some kind of something to gain out of it?
Yes, he did, because obviously he pursued a policy of stronger French influence throughout the region, right? As I mentioned, for example, until even today, there's very strong, for example, in Lebanon, there's a very strong French influence.
Their second language is French.
Because because it dates from these times.
Okay.
It's
basically, this is considered like the origin of Lebanon as an independent state. I mean, obviously, it has very ancient history as a Phoenicia. It was part of Phoenicia, etc. Different, but Lebanese sort of statehood has its origins in this time when France and Napoleon III sort of became the protectorate of Lebanon.
Okay.
Obviously, it gained full independence after World War II, after 1945.
They influenced.
They influenced. And because And first of all, why Lebanon? Because obviously, they were the Catholic Maronites of Lebanon. Armenians were, at the end of the day, we had a very, again, strong Catholic community, but most of Armenians were obviously not Catholic, right? We have our own Armenian church.
Yeah.
And at this time, also, the Protestant Armenian community was also slowly being developed. But obviously, the French favored the Catholics, right? Because it's a Catholic.
Naturally.
Yeah, naturally. Yeah. Yeah.
The Protestants would be more of the English side.
The Protestants, actually, we're gonna talk about that later when we do like the Armenian American ties. So the Armenian Protestant community might develop in the 1830s, 1840s as a result of American missionaries who came to Western Armenia and other parts of the Ottoman Empire. And this is how basically, we're gonna talk about this. Obviously, Armenian ties even predate the missionaries, right? We had Armenians in North America, even in colonial times, right? Yeah. Who settled in the
fascinating.
It is we had Armenian before even the Pilgrims arrived.
16th century.
Yeah? In the early 17th century, before the Pilgrim Fathers arrived.
That's wild, man.
It is. We're gonna talk about it. I don't want to get into that now.
Like,
but
who are you and where's your family?
Yeah, that itself is a separate episode just to cover that. That's interesting.
We know that there was a couple significant, let's call them treaties or whatnot, that occurred during this time era. San Stefano and Berlin. Can you tell us the significance of each one, the similarities of each one, and why those specific cities?
Absolutely. So an important milestone, Mike, was in 1877-78, war broke out between Russia and the Ottoman Empire. This was, again, like I said, an important milestone because it was during this time that a lot of things were happening. Russia expanded, as I said, into Eastern Armenia earlier in the 19th century, and then it clashed with the Ottoman Empire. Yes. This was an important milestone because in 1878, 77, 78, Russia, during the Russo-Turkish War, was able to win, and it resulted in a major victory for Russia. And then it basically reached almost the suburbs of, it reached the suburbs of the capital, Constantinople. The Russian army
they got that far, huh?
Exactly. Yeah. The Russian army in the Balkans, it basically took over all of the Balkans, most of the Balkans, Bulgaria, and it entered Thrace and reached as far as the town of San Stefano, which is on the outskirts of Constantinople. Can you imagine? So they were at the gates of the Ottoman capital.
That's a heck of an
investment. And the Sultan immediately sued for peace. Abdul Hamid II, who had just rose on the Ottoman throne, he just sued for peace. And then Russians did conclude a peace treaty with the Ottomans. And then, according in San Stefano on March 3rd, 1878, according to this treaty, Kars, Ardahan, these parts of Armenia, and also the Alashkert Valley would to be part of Russia. Russia would also have some gains in the Balkans. Bulgaria would be reestablished as an independent state with vast borders as kind of allied with Russia. And this was the Treaty of San Stefano. According to Article 16 of the Treaty of San Stefano, besides getting these territories of Armenia, the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid II also promised to carry out reforms in the Western Armenian provinces to guarantee the rights of Armenians. That is to say, these wanton killings and persecution would end. And I have to point this out, this persecution had greatly intensified because as a result, earlier when Russia took over Northern Caucasus, a lot of the Muslims of Northern Caucasus were at that time expelled from there. And when they were expelled in the 1860s, they actually kind of retreated to the Ottoman Empire because they viewed the Sultan as the Caliph, right, as the head of all of the Muslims. So they were very much fanatically, fundamentally driven Muslims, these people who were expelled. Yeah. And what did the Sultan do? He actually resettled them in Western, many of them in Western Armenia. And can you imagine these people angry who have been just kicked out of their homes by Russia? They're being resettled in Armenian villages next to the Armenians.
Yeah.
So Armenian woes and troubles now intensified not only with the Kurds, but these new people, for example, Circassians, which is a nationality of Northern Caucasus, that beforehand they always had good relations with the Armenians, to be honest. There's even a subgroup of Circassians known as Cherkezo-Hais.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
These are like basically Armenians who at one point in the Middle Ages, in the 15th, 16th century, they ventured to Northern Caucasus and they became part of the Circassians. They're a subgroup of the Circassians.
Yeah.
I mean, but now all of that was sort of washed aside. These angry people who just lost their homes. A lot of them were killed in what is today, for example, areas like Sochi, which is now part of Russia, part of the Circassia in Northern Caucasus, Adigay, etc. These people now were resettled by the Sultan. This was a specific policy in Western Armenia, very angry. So there were clashes. They started to be incited to attack Armenians. So by the time this 1877-78 war broke out, Armenian community was now constantly being attacked, not only by the Kurds, by the Circassians also. And there was a lot of instability. Obviously, during the war, the Sultan started to incite the Circassians to attack. Plus, the Russian Tsars also kind of employed Armenian generals. Top leading generals in the campaign war happened to be Armenians. Maybe that was also specific, so that anger was kind of directed against the Armenians.
From every point.
From every point. So Loris Melikian, this famous Mikhail Loris Melikian, this count, was an outstanding general. He was put in charge by the Tsar to attack Kars, Ardahan, and he succeeded brilliantly. He took over those cities brilliantly. Ter Hukasyan, another Armenian general, also had a brilliant. So top leading generals were Armenians. So this also sort of created in the eyes of the Ottomans that, oh, look, the Armenians look what they're doing. But in reality, like I said, most of the Armenians were just peasants trying to survive. It's not Armenians doing it. They had nothing to do with these politics, but they sort of bore the brunt of this hatred and attacks.
Collateral damage, basically.
Exactly.
The regime,
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then in the San Stefano Treaty, at least the Armenian Patriarch of Constantinople, Nerses Varjapetyan, said, we have to do something to end these attacks against Armenian villagers. This innocent Armenians being slaughtered, their property is looted. The Sultan doesn't do anything to protect their lives, their property, nothing. Looted, killed, raped, pillage. This is what is going on in Western Armenia. This has to end.
Yeah.
So he basically, when the Tsar was the victorious side, so he said that you have to do something. So the Tsar agreed. He kind of felt also bad seeing what is happening because of this war that he launched against the Ottomans. And then Article 16 of the Treaty of San Stefano said that the Russian troops would remain in Western Armenia, and when the reforms are carried out, then they would withdraw.
Yeah.
Okay? And they would also get, as I said, Kars, Ardahan, and the Alashkert Valley. However, at this time, unfortunately, in Europe, there was a rivalry between these great powers of Europe. So Great Britain was the great rival of Russia.
Yeah.
So, and at this time, Great Britain, the premier was Benjamin Disraeli of the Conservative Party. He actually had a dislike of very strong dislike of Russia. And, he said, no, we can't let the Russians be victorious and just do whatever they want. We have to revise the Treaty of San Stefano. Let's put together an international Congress which would decide what is going to take place, And, he put pressure on the Russian government. He also, helped the Sultan in this regard. And, it actually yielded results. So unfortunately, the Treaty of San Stefano was revised that same year in Berlin. A new Congress was put together on June 13th. It launched its work. And then on July 13th, there was a treaty that was concluded in Berlin.
Of
1878, same year,
yeah,
same year,
okay.
yeah. Which basically revised the Treaty of San Stefano. There were a number of revisions. They're not important to what we're talking about, but most importantly, the Russian army had to withdraw without seeing the reforms carried out. And the reforms would be guaranteed not by Russian Tsar, who would overlook the reforms and make sure that they're carried out. Then the Russian army would withdraw. No, the Sultan was simply obliged to sort of like report back to the great powers of Europe that signed under the Treaty of Berlin that he would actually carry out the reforms. So, and these great powers were, it was Germany, because Germany was just emerged as a unified country under Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, Italy, Great Britain, Austria-Hungary, France, and Russia. So instead of just Russia, now it was 6 powers that were signatories. And when the question was internationalized, it became known as the Armenian question. So the Armenian question at this time, and the 16th article of San Stefano was reversed. It actually, the 16 became 61. So it kind of reversed 16, it becomes 61. It became Article 61. It had the same thing, that reforms have to carry out in the Armenian provinces. However, it didn't say under the watch of the Russian Tsar and the Russian army. It would say then the Sultan had to report to the great powers how he carried out the reforms. But there were no specific mechanism that he has to oblige to carry it down. Basically living up to him. And at that time, it was very much criticized by the European press, saying you're basically Sultan is not going to carry this out.
It's almost it's fake.
Exactly.
It's just wizardry, man.
Yeah, wizardry. It's just something to write
wizardry.
and.
Exactly. There was no specific mechanism and pressure.
There's no mandate.
It's basically saying look, in the modern day, let them sue us. We'll hire the lawyers. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
This is basically the ploy, right? Fine. Write it down.
Yeah.
As time goes along, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Just to shut them up.
I want to thank again everybody who's joining us live on YouTube and Facebook. We're having a very interesting conversation about the Armenian question. Dr. Gevork Nazian is kind of giving us the prehistory of how it led to this. Now, you mentioned the Brits. Obviously, the Brits have had a big role in a lot of the events that took place in Armenian history, in the 19th, 20th century, and what you just mentioned right now. What was the policy of the Brits on the Armenian question?
Right. Yes, that's a great question. During the premiership of the conservatives under Benjamin Disraeli, the policy was not definitely favoring the Armenians. And again, it wasn't that necessarily he was against the Armenians, but he viewed Russian expansion as a threat to his own interest, to the British interest.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what is the greatest criticism of the Benjamin Disraeli government and the conservatives is that they basically he was willing to disregard humanitarian principles, and Armenians were being killed, being slaughtered. He was okay with disregarding that as long as it served a political agenda of what he viewed was best for Britain.
Which was towards Russia, right?
I mean, Armenians were killed. That for him was secondary.
He's got his agenda.
Exactly.
Right? He's got his primary agenda. And whatever else happens, it's like you guys said, collateral damage.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so he was heavily criticized by a more sort of progressive British elements who were saying, Armenians are being killed left and right. And you're just talking about like cold politics, realpolitik, and he actually was heavily criticized for that.
The Brits.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about there were British politicians, including prime ministers such as William Gladstone, that were of the Liberal Party, that were pro-Armenian, and they were pro-Armenian first and foremost out of humanitarian principles. They said that no, the good name of Britain is being dishonored because of your cold, harsh policies. And actually, William Gladstone, Mike, he actually was very much pro-Armenian.
Interesting for the British Empire, let's call them that, because that's what they were. They always were. Mm-hmm. That they had different sides of this. With the story.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Because look, at the end of the day, just like how you've been mentioning, is the British had an agenda. They had a major agenda, a big one, anti-Russian agenda, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Which I mean eclipses anything.
This is the time known as the Great Game. If you know about the Great Game, that was like they viewed all of Eurasia, even like several continents, as a whole, like large chessboard, and they would actually fight over control of Central Asia, Western Asia, Eastern Asia.
To your point, during this time, the English Commonwealth was strong. Like they still had rule over, let's be honest, like 40% of the world.
Yeah.
At least.
And the Jew was India, believe it or not.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that.
India. The viceroy was the viceroy of India. That was how important it was. Like after the king and queen, it was the viceroy of India. But you're absolutely right. And even the Ottoman Sultan said like, I forgot to mention this part. So according to the Treaty of Berlin, Russia kept Kars and Ardahan, but it had to withdraw from the Alashkert Valley. And if we show just some of the images, Vic, I want to show that so our audience actually sees. This is actually from the 18th century that you will talk about. This is the coat of arms of Armenia during our national liberation struggle that was to come. So this was put together in the 18th century. And this is, again, the coat of arms in the 18th and early 19th century. It kind of evolved in the coat of arms of the First Republic and the coat of arms we have today. So
it's interesting how it has the moon and the stars, right? That had to be some sort of homage to, or let's call it an homage, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. But do you see the Noah's Ark? It's still the same with
Go back for a second, Vic.
It's still the Noah's Ark and the eagle and the lion. It's kind of like some things are the same, but a lot of them have changed. You're absolutely right, Interesting. And this is a very important map, Vic. This is a British map of actually Armenia on the within the Ottoman Empire. So this is a British map from the 19th century, which shows that Armenia is one of the provinces of the Ottoman Empire. And even the Ottomans themselves, we'll see a little bit later on, they also noted that Armenia is such. I actually have an actual, again, map. Me with my maps again,
maps are the best.
Yeah. This is from 1844, Mike. This is a British map. As you can see, it says Turkey.
Bring it to this camera.
Turkey in Asia, and it actually shows the various regions. So it shows the Ottoman Empire, but Armenia as one of the province of the Ottoman Empire is stated. This is 1844 British map.
Do I have it right? Yeah, there we go.
So you see, even within the Ottoman Empire, I mean, everyone recognized, the British, even the Ottomans themselves, that yes, there's an Armenia which is part of our empire. We conquered it, but it's a region of Armenia within our empire.
And this map is dated back to when?
1844. This is a British map. That's actual original map. Yeah.
This is an original map.
Original map, yes.
Wow.
We should take a picture of this and post it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And and remember we talked about like after the Armenian question, this is when the Ottomans themselves, they changed, they no longer started to use Ermenistan, changed it to Anadolu and included Armenia within this fake created term of Anadolu, because obviously if you're going to talk about Armenia and Armenians are saying, we need at least reforms throughout Armenia, not to say even liberation of Armenia, then it's a problem for us. If we had this neutral term of Anatolia, doesn't mention Armenia, Armenians.
It's funny how this forgery of creating fake names, fake areas or whatever, it dates back to
and what
centuries.
Is even sad, like you even
and
see
it continues
Armenian
till
scholars use it, like Eastern Armenia, to describe Armenia. Why? Why are you on board with that? I mean, it's just unacceptable. It serves a Turkish government political agenda. Why are you doing it? Is that ignorance? Is done on purpose? I still don't know.
They're paid off most likely.
It's very sad, but we have to speak out. We have to point out that it's complete negation of actual factual history.
You know what? Shame on them, because the truth is coming out, and thanks to amazing historians like yourself and this journey we're on, and it's not just this. There are amazing people who are reaching out to us that are doing their own research. They're putting the word out there, and this is the time to do this. We're already late, but it's better to be late than not. Even start.
Absolutely.
So and this is the purpose of that. What we're doing here, presenting all this information, so people can watch, share, learn something. So when you're having a conversation or a debate, now you have all this knowledge to argue with whoever's coming at you with the false information, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, here's the interesting thing. A thought about this is, with all this movement during this time, pre and post Armenian question, with their factions kind of coming together, were there any political parties that were formed? Was there anything taking shape that may have, let's say, sparked a fire with the Armenian population?
Absolutely.
Right?
That's a great question, Mike. Well, actually, as a result of the Congress of Berlin, if we can just see, I'm going to see a couple more images. I want to just add on that, Mike. Can we please? Like here, we see actually an Ottoman map from 1877 in Ottoman Turkish. They use like Arabic script, but it was in Turkish, known as Ottoman Turkish. It actually says Ermenistan. This is the last Ottoman map that actually used Ermenistan
Don't they still refer to it as Ermenistan?
They only now refer to this, like the Soviet border Armenia, as Ermenistan, no longer including the real Ermenistan, which used to be Western Armenia, right?
Yeah.
They no longer refer to it. But on this Ottoman map from 1877, this is right before the end of the Russo-Turkish War and the Congress of Berlin and San Stefano, they still use the name Ermenistan as a province of the Ottoman Empire. And
this is insane.
This is the last time they actually used it.
Wow.
Yeah. If we can see just a couple of more images.
Yeah.
Okay, a very important another event, as I mentioned, like in the Balkans, in Greece before that, there were also national liberation movements that were quite successful. For example, I mean, it's a fact, we were also very much inspired by the Greek liberation war against the Ottomans, which took place from 1821 to 1832. So Greece was one of the first countries that actually reestablished its independence from the Ottomans in 1832. There was very famous, basically 11-year war against the Turks, and the Greeks succeeded and won their independence. So it kind of also inspired our own, freedom fighters to seek the same. Because obviously, again, like I said, why did Greece fight? Because they were also treated as second-class subjects. They were,
we share a common enemy.
Yeah.
To this day. So
this is
we have a lot of Greek brothers and sisters who listen to us, and they comment and they send us
friends.
This is actually kind of like a romantic painting of the Greek War of Independence. If you see it's like the ruins, the Parthenon and the ruins in Athens of the classical Greece, which also served as an inspiration, because we know Greece at one time was glory and powerful.
Yes.
Do we know who the painter is?
It's actually a European painter. I forgot his name, but like a lot of the Europeans also kind of sympathized because they viewed as Greece also as an important place, for civilization, and so they sympathized with the Greeks. Obviously, it was a European painter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should I go to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And here actually is Hamidian Hayrik, our own leader, who in already 19th century, he also was a great educator. He was a spiritual leader in 1850s. He established various Armenian publications in Constantinople. Later on, he moved it to Van. For example, Artsakh Vaspurakani was an important journal established in 1850s, which also sort of, spoke about the need for Armenians to defend their rights, to end, these the persecution that was ongoing. So he saw firsthand in places like Vaspurakan, the Van province, the persecution of Armenians. So he was a great champion for the Armenian cause. Hamidian Hayrik, he was a spiritual leader. Armenian spiritual leader. Later on, he became the Patriarch of Constantinople, so the spiritual head of like Western Armenians. And of course, and later on in 1893 to 1907, he became the Catholicos of all Armenians, Hamidian Hayrik. And what is significant about him, during the Congress of Berlin, an Armenian delegation also went to Berlin to plead the cause of the Armenians. And again, this great power said, yes, we're going to put a word for you. But what was very sad for him that, he said, I'm not happy with this Article 61 of the Congress of Berlin. Basically, it doesn't give us anything. And he was right.
Yeah.
They say we're going to ask the Sultan to do this and that, but Sultan is not going to do it. And this is exactly what the Sultan did. And he just actually, after that, intensified his persecution and attacks against the Armenians. Not only he did not carry out the reforms, but he intensified the attack and persecution of the Armenians. And at this time, Hamidian Hayrik made his important speech saying that, I saw these various people from the Balkans, etc., and there was this bowl with harissa, this cooked harissa. It was like, he was using this as a metaphor, and all of them used their swords to get their part, but
to get their share,
to get their share. But I didn't even have like my ladle was even made out of paper, so I couldn't even get my share. We need to have like iron ladle that can actually get what is ours.
Interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, it's a metaphor that metaphorically, and it became this iron ladle became this metaphor for Armenian self-reliance, Armenian strength, Armenian resistance that needs to be built up.
Yeah.
And this is coming back already to Mike's question. So all of this, when this happened, a number of attempts were made by the Armenian sides to organize their resistance, organize their actions, coordinate their actions. And before even the political parties came about, there were a number of societies. Often they're called secret societies because they operate
factions and whatnot. That probably talked about these things.
They operated in secret because what they did, their activities were clandestine to organize Armenians to self-defense against these attacks by these Kurds. And as I said, these angry Circassians who were kicked out, who otherwise weren't bad people, but obviously they had such strength, such great woes against Russia that unfortunately they often would take it out on Armenian, peasants. So like,
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So like these Armenian various societies started to form as early as 1860s, especially in 1870s that picked up. Union, for example, there was this important organization in Van, Union for Salvation, that was 1872. Then another society, the Black Cross in Van, 1878. In 1881, Defenders of the Homeland in Karin. But all these societies were short-lived and did not have the same effect that a more organized, powerful political party was needed. So, that naturally led to the establishment of the Armenakan Party in 1885, which was the first Armenian political party established in Van. So when it was established in Van, 1885, there was an important Armenian leader, Mkrtich Portugalian, who actually was a teacher in Van, but the Turkish authorities that same year in 1885 expelled him from Van. He had to flee to Marseille in France. He published a journal called Armenia in Marseille. So this freedom fighters who established the Armenakan Party were called after the journal Armenia, right? They were the Armenakans.
When exiled, write a journal or a manifesto.
Yeah.
Amazing, right?
Yes. So the Armenakan Party, which operated in Vaspurakan, that was an important first Armenian political party, which, as I said, fought for the rights of Armenians. Their platform specified that we have to organize, we have to defend our rights here on our native soil. Only 2 years later, another Armenian political party was formed in 1887 in Geneva, known as the Social Democratic Hanchakian Party.
Now I have a really quick question. When he was exiled to France, that his journal, how did that get distributed throughout the Ottoman Empire?
That's a great question.
Right?
It was smuggled in. It was
because I would imagine
banned.
something like that would be really difficult to bring back in if that person, for that specific reason, was sent out,
caught
right?
with that journal, that was an automatic death sentence.
Wow.
You would be hanged immediately.
Wow.
So it was smuggled. The journal Armenia was smuggled.
Okay, so hold on. So think about all the
it was banned.
Secret societies or these little secret factions or groups or whatnot that were probably like, okay, dude, bring these leaflets in and start passing them out to people. Come on, get the word out. Get the word out. Just picture that for a second. That's insane.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're going to die. You get caught with that, you're dead.
Well, most of these first early revolutionaries were actually killed, arrested, because they were just starting out. They didn't have experience. They were often like students, young, very young, like 19, 20, 21, 22.
That just shows what our ancestors
I got
went
chills,
through.
man.
I mean,
that's crazy.
Everything they tried to for their survival, and like you said, students, these young kids, right? Think of the high schoolers now.
Yeah, they were
very young, unexperienced, but they
not even like 17, 16.
Yeah, they joined this movement, and unfortunately, most of them got killed, like you said. So, but just thinking about what they were doing is just unbelievable. And
dude, you're not sneaking in records in the communist regime. You're bringing in a leaflet that's like anti-Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a joke. It's crazy, man.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's wild. It's wild.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, so like not only Armenakans, but the Social Democratic Hanchakian Party was also influenced by Makartic Portugalian. So he's an important, there were other important figures. And at this time, a lot of Armenian writers, like Rafi, for example, you know Rafi, right?
Yeah, of course.
He also wrote these novels to inspire Armenians to, again, to resist, to throw off this chokehold of the Ottoman Sultan. So Rafi is also, for example, there are other, Rafael Patkanyan, another important Western Armenian writer, Mikhail Nalbandian, and before that, Khachatur Abovyan, of course.
Of course, yeah.
So a number of Armenian intellectuals, they also, through their pen, through their works, they inspired the Armenians to resist this tyranny. They said, no, like you have to defend your basic human rights, which are being trampled upon.
I can imagine all the flack they got at the time. Right? All the persecution they probably received from their writings or whatever the case
Basically,
is.
there was a clash of two narratives. These Armenian intellectuals, they were educated in Europe, which stressed human rights, equality before the law. Then they would come back to their own homeland. They see this sultan, this oppressive tyranny, that you have the Sharia law, you know, you're like second-class subject.
Yeah.
You know, like it's like a clash of narratives. It was like outdated system that persecuted your people.
I say it, censorship. I mean, it was like the, what, mid to late 19th
I mean, can you imagine
these
these great men left for Europe, went and studied and you know,
and many
educated
returned back
and returned,
sort of like
give back.
They could have stayed in Europe, but they risked their life. Many were killed when they returned to Western Armenia.
Unbelievable.
The students, a lot of them were killed.
Unbelievable, man.
Speaking of killing, now the Hamidian massacres, right? So Abdul Hamid II obviously carried out this atrocity and these massacres. It basically was from 1894 to 1896, roughly, right? That was the time period. What was its impact on the Armenians in that area?
Right. So absolutely. Well, you know, as I said, not only Abdul Hamid II did not carry out the reforms, he actually intensified his persecution and the killings, right? So he said, well, wait a minute, if Armenians are asking for these rights, you know, for reforms throughout, because as I said, you know, it was simply asking for this. Now even Article 61 of the Congress of Berlin was asking for reforms throughout Western Armenia to respect the rights of Armenians, their basic human rights. This is all it was. But you know, he obviously felt that, you know, these are his subjects, he's the Sultan, he can do whatever he wants. And like I said earlier, his policy was, okay, how can I actually punish these Armenians? And he started to instigate the Kurds to do most of the killings. He set up this Hamidian detachments, cavalry detachments to actually attack the Armenians, and these known under his name, Hamid, right? Hamidiye, named after him. So these Kurdish bands, Kurdish detachments started to attack Armenians. And, throughout all of Western Armenia, even other parts of the Ottoman Empire, Armenians were attacked en masse. This was unprecedented. Even in 1870, 78, nothing like this happened. I mean, the scale was huge. This was only later on trumped by the Armenian Genocide, which was even much extensive and larger. It was total extermination of the Armenians. But here, he just wanted to sort of cut down the Armenian numbers, sort of show them, to punish them en masse, which was, again, before the Armenian Genocide, this was unheard of, when up to 300,000 Armenians were killed during these 1894 and 96 period. 300,000.
You know, I've mentioned this before. People tend to, you know, when we throw these numbers, people, especially now, they look at it just numbers. I don't think they really understand or comprehend the size of 300 bodies of men, women, and children, innocent. So I hope
try counting to 1,000.
Yeah, I hope our listeners and watchers can somehow close your eyes and imagine. I know as harsh as that might be, a division of it, but 300,000 people. It's not a joke. It's not just a number, guys. These are lives that were just taken, all because of this man.
Just because he nodded his head.
Absolutely. And let me add, Vic, not only 300,000 were killed, many were forced to convert to Islam.
Yes.
Many were forced to flee Armenia. Hundreds of thousands fled Armenia.
Changed their names.
Fled. Like many even came to the United States. Much more fled to Europe and Russia, places like that. So it was this was like, some people even say when we speak of the Armenian genocide, we have to start with the Hamidian massacres, because this was like a prelude to the Armenian genocide. And it actually showed, unfortunately, Europe and these European great powers who were signatories to the Berlin Congress, who said that we're the protectors of Armenians. So they basically said, yeah, we're going to take that upon ourselves to protect Armenians, right? They didn't do anything.
Yeah.
They didn't do anything. I mean, the only thing that did happen, and I'm going to talk about this great William Gladstone, Prime Minister of Great Britain, who succeeded Disraeli, is actually one of the best liked, served the longest terms. 4 times he became the Prime Minister of Great Britain. William Gladstone was actually very much pro-Armenian. He made these fiery speeches throughout Britain saying, like, Armenians are being after the Hamidian massacres, 300,000 Armenians died. Guess what? We're guilty because of that. Because we were the ones who basically, not only we said, okay, Russian army, leave this area and go back to Russia, but we said we will take upon ourselves to protect the Armenians and guarantee their rights. But we're not doing that. The signatories of Congress of Berlin, the 6 countries that I talked about, they're not doing anything to protect them.
Yeah.
So, they very strongly put pressure on the Sultan to do something. But again, Sultan just stalled. And he said, yes, I'm going to do it. Yes, I'm going to carry out these reforms. But he didn't do anything, pretty much. And again, it's kind of cynical, but true. It wasn't only when totally the Sultan continued to maintain ties with Great Britain up until World War I, he started getting closer to Germany. And there was a political shift. Then Great Britain changed finally its policy and said, wait a minute, what is happening to Armenians is not right. But before that, oftentimes, unfortunately, yes, they would close their eyes to what is happening, because every time Sultan would say, wait, you're damaging our relationship, you're damaging the political links that we have, which is a sad reality. And this was actually first and foremost criticized by this great, outstanding, progressive British statesmen who weren't part of the government. People like James Bryce, William Gladstone, who unfortunately was already no longer in 1896. He wasn't Prime Minister of Great Britain. But they strongly criticized this policy and duplicity. They said this only brings shame to the name of our nation.
I'm curious, with all of the massacres happening, the Hamidian massacre specifically, right? Was there post Hamidian massacres, was there any sort of reform? Was there anything that was, and how, if there was a reform, how was it even formed? How were they even listened to at this point? You just demolished 300,000 people.
Yeah.
Right.
So who's going to listen to you? You would think. But if there was reform, who spearheaded it? How? How was that collectively organized and pushed? Especially after something, let's call this almost like a black swan event.
Yes. Well, like I said, Mike, unfortunately, these reforms stalled and only really began to materialize when Great Britain no longer viewed Russia as a rival. And this happened when Germany already strengthened on the world stage and became closely aligned with the Ottoman Empire on the eve of World War I. And Britain, realizing that now Germany was a greater threat to its own interests and to its own empire, they had to collaborate more with Russia. So finally, it was this time, 1912, as late as 1912, when already Ottoman Empire, was no longer having this British orientation and was more aligned with Germany, with Wilhelm Kaiser II of Germany, against Britain, against France, against Russia. Then these allies started to say, "Oh, wait a minute, right? You know, we have to do something about the Armenian question." Jeez. And this is the time, on the eve of World War I, that finally, in 1912, finally a package was passed. And the Ottoman Sultan and the Young Turks, who already came to power in 1908, had to.
So this was basically, the whole time was a secondary situation based off of someone allying with someone else.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It was not at the forefront of any of these nations. It was just a matter of oh no, wait, hold on, you guys are friends now? Okay, hold on, let's figure this out.
Yeah.
Now you mentioned 1912.
Wow.
It took, I mean, you're talking about years, right?
I mean, there was another massacre in 1909 in Adana. Armenians were continuously killed.
Yeah. So as far as reforms go, what type of reform finally came about in between, I think it was from 1912 or 1914. 14.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little?
Yes, absolutely. I actually want to show a map as I talk along, Vic, and actually, to illustrate my point with the slide. This is actually the signing of San Stefano, okay, that we mentioned. And this is the signing of this Berlin conference. As you can see, that one was the Russians and the Ottomans. But here we actually see the great powers. So it's more like international, as you can see. And, it's like the makeup of the Congress is completely different. This is very indicative of
I love these paintings.
Yeah. This is the Congress of Berlin. And here, actually, do you see? I talked about in San Stefano, it was revised. Do you see in yellow is the part that would go according to the Treaty of Berlin to Russia? But according to earlier San Stefano, do you see in sort of pink?
Yeah.
That area was left out of the of the treaty that followed, of Treaty of Congress. So basically,
was there a particular reason as to why?
Yeah, it was mostly British pressure under Disraeli.
Okay.
And later on, of course, and here we can see after the Hamidian massacres, various European journals, this is, for example, French, they called him the Bloody Sultan because he killed so many Armenians. Yeah.
Death behind him.
Yeah.
That's a great depiction.
Yeah. And this is actually William Gladstone, the Prime Minister of Britain, who was very much pro-Armenian. Here he is giving a passionate speech, as I said, saying the same things that I said, we took upon those guarantees to protect the Armenians, and we aren't doing anything. They're being slaughtered in hundreds of thousands. This is in Liverpool. This is just a statue of him in Westminster. William Gladstone, the Prime Minister.
At the Abbey?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
So that's inside. Oh,
yes.
Man,
yes.
I visited that place. I never got to go inside. Which time I went?
Yes, absolutely. And this is Catholicos Georg V, who was he reigned for a long time, so he was very important. Armenian Catholicos during the Armenian Genocide, during the reforms, played an important role in and this, we came to the era that we're talking about. So Georg V, Poros Nubar, exactly. This is a photo from the Nubarian Library from Paris, the archives there. So Georg V actually nominated Poros Nubar to oversee as head of the Armenian national delegation.
I was going to ask you about Poros Nubar eventually.
Okay.
About go on. Just I was going to ask you. Go ahead.
Right.
Take it away, brother.
Okay. So
Okay. All right. Let's continue.
These pictures right there. We might as well go in and talk about them because we were going to eventually, ask.
No, I didn't want him to lose his thought about the the reform.
The reforms,
Yeah.
right? So, like to make sure that the reforms are going through, like I said, basically, finally they happen. It was mostly the initiative of Russia, but in close coordination with Great Britain, France, and other allies, who already by this time were allies, right? In as early as 1907, the British and the Russians, they concluded this Anglo-Russian alliance of friendship, which, as I said, because both already feared the rise of Germany, so they became natural allies against this new foe, as Germany just like 30, 40 years earlier had reunified Otto under the Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. So it became a new sort of this threat for all of Europe and even the world, you can say. So this collaboration, at least in terms of us now no longer being this pawn in these politics, was kind of helpful, or it seemed helpful, because finally these reforms were to be carried out, and the British also agreed they no longer stood in the way of these reforms finally. So the only, actually, Germany now started to more look out for the interests of Turkey, and they sort of started to speak out against these reforms. And Boris Nubar was the one nominated by the Catholicos Georg V as the head of the Armenian national delegation. Remember on the First Republic episode, we talked about that the Armenian national delegation began in 1912.
Yes.
We, of course, know that as early as 1906, Boris Nubar set up the Armenian General Benevolent Union, the AGBU, very important, son of the Prime Minister of Egypt, very important Armenian leader. So 1912 is the time when Catholicos nominated him as the head of the Armenian national delegation. And basically that was the time that Nubar also championed the cause of the reforms throughout Western Armenia. Finally, after 2 years of grueling negotiations, the Young Turk government agreed to sign these reforms. Can you imagine? From 1878, it seems they finally were to be realized in 1914.
That's
But
like
they
almost for almost 40 years.
Yeah, 36 years,
36 years,
to be exact.
Are you kidding me?
But here's the irony, the sad irony. They signed it on February 8, 1914, only months before the outbreak of World War I. And when World War I just broke out, they said, you know what, since there's war, we're canceling it. So in that same year, in December, they said, no, we're not going to carry out the reforms.
That makes my brain turn, man.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, if anyone knows their World War I history, we know what sparked it, right? The assassination of Duke Franz Ferdinand. You would think maybe, just saying, maybe they had some insider information, something like this, or they knew what was to come. They knew maybe there was something brewing.
It's possible.
Not necessarily the assassination, but maybe there was something brewing. So they made these deals. It was like, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're realizing that pretty much everything is almost staged now.
It's not even that. It's like
it's theater.
The coincidences are not really coincidences.
Yeah.
These people that govern or are a part of hierarchies that we can't even fathom have knowledge of things to come when it comes to geopolitical affairs.
But
this is a fact.
Right.
What's funny
Right.
is if you look at history, and not just Armenian history, and if you read books or watch documentaries throughout, going prior to kingdoms and stuff, a lot of the events that took place were setups by kings on purpose, right? To agitate the other end, or to create some kind of a situation where it would spark a war or reason to go conquer and things like that. So, I mean, those are old, playbooks that have been used over time. And just because it's like the government, it's not kingdoms anymore, it's governments, and they're supposed to be more sophisticated and educated. No, they use the same playbooks. It's the same thing. Which
to your point, there's always a group of individuals. Doesn't matter who it is. They could be big leaders, not so big leaders, whatever, that don't want to push this to that level. Yeah. And then there's a group of individuals that are maniacal about it.
Yeah.
No matter what, we need to light the match.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't make a difference.
This actually leads me to the next question. 1914, World War I breaks out. As far as the Turkish government goes, I mean, we all kind of know, well, not kind of, we know, what they did, but what was, why, I should say why, not what, why did they carry out the Armenian genocide? What was the main reason behind it?
Right. So exactly. So these reforms, like you said, sort of they unwillingly kind of signed it, but that was for the young Turks, this ultra chauvinist, nationalists. That was basically for them the last straw. So although they did sign it, but they said, we have to deal with these Armenians once and for all. And then basically, for them, ultimately, they already decided, and even Talat Pasha, one of the three main organizers of the Armenian genocide and the leader of Turkey at the time, he said, Armenian question, there's one way to solve the Armenian questions. If you don't have Armenians, you don't have Armenian question, right?
Yeah.
So that was his way of sort of dealing with the Armenian question. His solution to the Armenian question was the complete eradication of the Armenians. Because, like you said, if there are no Armenians, I don't have Armenian question, So, yeah. So the Armenian genocide ultimately is, as we can see, is part of the like a Turkish attempt at solving the Armenian question. From Abdul Hamid, yeah, by just getting rid of the Armenians. I don't have Armenians. Yeah. I think there's even a saying, right? There's a person, I have a problem. There's no person, I don't have a problem. I mean, very cynical.
Yeah.
They took that position. He was very shrewd, very cynical, cold-blooded, mass murderer.
Yeah.
It was like a psychopath. I mean, there's no other way.
So with that said, sorry, this is like making my brain turn, guys. With that said, the establishment of the Armenian Republic,
Right.
post World War II. Post World War I. How did that solve the Armenian question? If they were trying to get rid of Armenians, how does that work out for them? What was the deal that was made?
Well,
Right?
right.
Your number one motive was to eradicate us.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we're given a country and a free republic, quote unquote.
Well, that's a good question. That's why people like Andranik said that, we did talk about the Treaty of Baku. Remember, he said, this is only temporarily. If you think Turks, as soon as they conquer Baku, as soon as they establish their Turan, as soon as Tatars are on board, they're going to leave even this small territory that they supposedly recognized as the Republic of Armenia. You're dead wrong. That's why Andranik, he had issues with the leaders of the First Republic. He said, okay, if you're signing...
That there may be capitulation.
No, he said, I don't trust this. This is not going to work. We have to just continue our struggle. We have to fight on whatever we have, and then... that's exactly the truth. I mean, we just basically... The Turkish army with the Tatars, they slaughtered in September of 1918 in Baku, 30,000 Armenians in Baku. Army of Nuri Pasha, the Islamic army of Caucasus, made up of these Ottomans and these Tatar bands. They slaughtered 30,000 Armenians in Baku in their drive to build this Turan,
Yeah.
And this so-called Azeris, who, as we talked about so many times, weren't even called Azeris. They were just pawns in the hands of this pan-Turkist like Nuri Pasha. He was the one who actually suggested the name Azerbaijan to this name. Never on Armenia and territory of historic Albania and Shirvan. He said, we'll name it Azerbaijan, then we'll annex the real Azerbaijan of Iran.
I was about to say the same thing.
Exactly. It was never Azerbaijan. So these so-called Azeris said, yeah, sure, let's do it, because they were like willing tools of this Nuri Pasha and these genocidal leaders of Turkey. So, and then
this map that we're looking at.
This map, okay, this is a very important map. So obviously the world saw what is going on during the genocide. It was heavily criticized. As early as 1915, the great power sent a note to Turkey saying you're carrying out a crime against humanity.
Yeah.
And you're going to be punished and held accountable for that. The name genocide wasn't yet coined. We know that, right? But they said you're carrying out the crime against humanity. And that was actually the first time in diplomatic history that a country was held accountable for what it is doing for mass atrocity, for genocide, mass murder as a crime against humanity. That was another first. Started with the Armenian Genocide. In international diplomacy, that was the first time. And President Wilson, he actually said, the only way to end this genocidal maniac leaders of Turkey and this militarist tradition, this Ottoman tradition, is to once and for all dismember Turkey. It would no longer be this large state that would constantly, over 1 or 2 generations, threaten not only the whole region, but the whole world.
Yeah.
With this Ottoman militant tradition. And he proposed the map of Armenia Sea to Sea. This is actually Wilson on a map. He actually drew the borders of Armenia Sea to Sea of United Armenia. This is his own handwriting, and he drew the borders. Do you see the borders?
Yeah.
And he even said, this is proposed Turkey with the striped line. And he said, okay, maybe we can a little bit more. It can be this, but I actually prefer that it is as less as it can be, because that way it will not threaten world peace as it does over a generation or two. And he was actually right. Look at what is happening today in Turkey. It basically reverted to the same militant Ottoman heritage and tradition.
Yeah.
It again threatens its neighbors. It's again attacking its neighbors.
Yeah, nobody likes them.
It attacked Armenia. It attacked Syria. It attacked Iraq. It's threatening Greece.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
and it's backstabbing,
it's occupying northern Cyprus.
Yeah, and backstabbed the West.
Of course it backstabbed.
Yeah.
That's why Wilson said, unfortunately, Wilson was not listened to. There were some corrupt, even American politicians, corrupt. The Turks bribed them, like Admiral Mark Bristol and others, who was the representative in Constantinople in 1920s. He would constantly send these dispatches to the State Department saying, no, the Turks are great. They're going to be great allies. Trust me. And now we find out he was actually always on the payroll of the Turks, of Mustafa Kemal.
Of course. What else is there? That's all they know how to do.
So basically, his own self-interest trumpeted national interests of the United States. Wilson was right. He was saying, no, if we are to be a sincere and strong ally, we have to share the same values.
Yeah.
Democracy, human rights, those are the guiding principles of Wilsonianism. And he was right, and they won over the world, but not in Turkey.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this is actually a very interesting photo. Remember, I talked about the national delegation, and this is actually Poros Nubar. Remember, we talked about the Paris Peace Conference, the national delegation. Do you see the flag?
Oh,
yes.
Oh,
look at the colors.
In the back.
There you go.
This is the flag that
They proposed.
Like so much.
I love this flag. I love the colors. Yeah. Now we covered the Paris Peace Conference on the topic of the First Republic, but as far as what was the context of the Armenian question during the Paris Peace Conference? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So as I said, Vic, Wilson and Great Britain and other allies said, for what happened, the Armenian People's War, basically martyred, sacrificed, genocided by this Turkish regime. At least Armenia has to be reborn.
Yeah.
Armenia has to be a strong and viable state, and the Turks have to be held accountable for what they have done. So the Turks, by attempting to exterminate the Armenians, they tried to solve the Armenian question. They tried to also, by killing off the Armenians, they once and for all, they wanted just to occupy the land and hold it, right? Because they're no longer already Armenians, natives living on their soil. We'll just kill them off and we'll just take it over. It's ours. That's it.
Yeah.
But Wilson said, no, this is not how international law works. Lloyd George, Prime Minister of Britain, said, this is not how international law works. You can't just do that and get away with it.
Yeah.
You're just encouraging further extermination, mass extermination of people, and you're doing and you're basically fitting into this genocidal policy. So the Paris Peace Conference was basically said that Armenian people have to be there has to be a restitution and retribution for what was done to the Armenian people. That was what whole Paris Peace Conference within the Armenian question context, also among other questions and issues that dealt with, was also that. So a just resolution to the so do you see, according to the Turks, solving the Armenian question meant exterminating the Armenians. But for the Allies, solving of the Armenian question meant triumph of justice, triumph of fairness and justice, which would actually, for the genocided, martyred Armenians, restore their native homeland, create a strong and viable state, which would incidentally would be a strong, also at the same time, a strong and powerful ally of the West throughout the region. And I would bet you money, I'm being totally honest, if this happened right now, Middle East would be much more stable, much more reliable, and have a much more pro-friendly pro-Western stance than it is now. Now it's like a power keg. It's just like everything is like unstable wars.
Yeah, it's interesting, the ripple effects. Looking at it now, right? Well, a little over 100 years later.
Yeah.
Of not just, let's say, what we're talking about in terms of our Armenian history, but
absolutely
what could have transpired.
And now look, the same Turkey that supposedly had to be West's ally, it's now one of the greatest challenges of Western hegemony, American hegemony throughout the region.
Well, I feel like
because they got what they wanted. You know, they paid off the Bristols and such, paid off people who basically took a different course what Wilson had outlined, and like led to decisions that are now disastrous, and we're paying for that now throughout the region, the whole region.
The whole region is. It's not just us.
Absolutely,
yeah,
it's much more unstable.
Cyprus, Greece,
absolutely,
absolutely.
Even look at the policies in Ukraine. Erdogan, for example, is not going along for what other Western allies now. He's a NATO member, but he's not following even the charter.
Oh, he's gone rogue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It almost feels like they've gone rogue.
What I want to do.
This is like a political conversation.
What they wanted. So as long as they got stronger, once again, they were beaten after World War I. This was the time of action. Now they're sort of like up on their feet. Now they're challenging the same hegemony. They're saying, no. Wait a minute. Why are you in this region? I mean, this actually started, do you remember, even in like United States during the war in 2001, they didn't let Americans, use their bases and things like that.
You mean during the
Iraq War?
The second version
Iraq
War.
War, 2003, I'm sorry. So, but coming back to this, and to your question, you're absolutely right. In the Paris Peace Conference proposed this Armenia, and eventually, as we talked about on the last episode, Republic of Armenia, the arbitrary award of President Woodrow Wilson. This is actually an initial map of the reforms that were to be carried out in the provinces, which never came about, from 1914, that the Turks actually signed, showing the Armenian provinces, of the Ottoman Empire. Yeah.
So again, that's interesting how. Well, wait, does this map portray that we had an outlet to the north with waterway or no?
No,
it doesn't, right? So the red dotted line is ours.
Right. At this time, it was simply the Armenians before the war were simply asking for reforms in the empire. But after World War I, already because of the genocide and what happened, obviously it was no longer possible that Armenia can exist within the Ottoman Empire. It had to be free and independent. And this is exactly what the Allies stated in the Paris Peace Conference. Because of these, mass extermination of Armenians, that's it. Armenia is to be free and independent and protected from this Turkish tyranny.
Yeah.
That was the conclusion of the Paris Peace Conference. And this is again the United Armenia C2C. If you saw, this was actually proposed by people like Woodrow Wilson, right? You saw with his own handwriting. So this wasn't like the Armenians saying this. This was the Americans, the British, even the French. They were all on board. They were on board saying like, we have to create this Armenian state that would be in close alliance with the allies, with the West.
You know what would have been interesting, and this is just something just hit me right now. If let's say we had this map right now, this was proposed and this is what we were given. How much trouble the Turks would have given us to use the Bosphorus Strait for shipping lanes, because it's the Black Sea.
Yeah.
So now if you want to trade, you're going to have to go through the Black Sea and through the Bosphorus Strait into the Aegean and into the Mediterranean, so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, listen, no.
But-
See, I understand what you're saying, but
right? So, but the Turks, listen, they're on both sides.
no, but at this point, when you're a country this size, you're at this point you're bigger, almost bigger than Turkey. You're a powerful nation. So, I mean, what do you mean more or less? Look at that. Half of Turkey is.
That is, they're controlling the Bosphorus Strait. They're on one side of it, that much, and they're on the other side of it.
I
right?
understand, but at this point, when you're a country this size, do you understand 100 years from this time, which is now, let's say, right? How powerful Armenia would have been because of
I'm not
trade,
denying that
commerce,
whatsoever.
and all this stuff. So when you're a powerful country, and I'm sure we would have a very powerful military at that point,
And
right?
maybe a navy, because we had water
We would have a
access.
navy
Yes.
because there you go, perfect point. Then at that point, I'm sorry, there's no way
But
that
look-
they would be trading with us.
Here's what's going on, and I'm not trying to get into geopolitics today and stray away from what we're talking about, but think about what's going on today, if you guys even know about it, is what's going on the eastern side of the Aegean with Greece and Turkey. Some of those islands they're Greek islands, are literally, I mean, you could blink your eyes, it's right there, and they're Greek islands.
Yeah.
But they're having naval issues. Not that they're not battling it out, but there's big problems from shipping lanes.
Yeah.
Right? It's Turkish waters, which are that much, and then it's Greek waters, which are this much. So now imagine, hypothetically speaking, if we did control this and we were going through that area in the modern day, they'd cause a lot of problems. Oh man, they would cause a lot of problems. I'm not saying we're better off or we're not better off by any means, but there
It's
would
possible.
still
It's possible,
be-
but imagine the amount of deals we would have had made with them because they needed to
Maybe.
trade, let's say, with
Maybe.
Azerbaijan or going or whatever. They had to use our routes, right? They had to use our ports possibly,
Yes.
or our train train routes, so forth. So I think, see, you're seeing what happening right now with, like you mentioned, the Greek.
the hypotheticals.
Yeah, what you're talking about with the Greeks and everything, it's because of what's happening right now. These maps don't exist. Armenia is not this big. Turkey is big, powerful NATO member, so they have that power to play with them.
they
Now,
do, yes.
if this was reality and 2023 and Armenia was this, I don't think they would have been as bold as they are today. So,
Absolutely. And to
sorry,
actually-
we kind of.
no. That's a
Hypotheticals are interesting scenarios, because what if? Because we're seeing what was actually proposed.
absolutely.
This could have been a big possibility. That right
Yeah.
there on screen.
If I can ask a question, Abiding is asking if basically if the Turks signed off on the proposed borders, could that be realized today?
What do you mean signed off? I don't know.
Like if these borders were proposed by Wilson and the Turkish
Turks
government agreed to it,
Yeah.
can they be realized with these old maps?
Oh, yes. Well, not this specifically. Remember, then it was the arbitral award of the 4 provinces. That for sure, the lawful Ottoman Turkish government has signed it. So according to international law, that's absolutely still in force. It's another question why today the government of the Republic of Armenia is not pursuing that path. Because it feels that
So it's occupied land.
it's occupied land.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
But the funny thing is, when you talk about this, then you get accused of being, siding with the West, and then people miss the point of this. If that signed document is still in
That's
force,
because they don't know history.
Yeah.
well, okay, but that's the thing. I mean, I get it that people have this thing towards Russia and everything, but again, I've come to a realization that Russia has done nothing but hurt us for
Exactly.
over
No, yeah.
200 years.
Constant
war.
ourselves as the saviors and helpers, but our territory and our people keep shrinking.
Yeah.
Why?
But that's the thing. So whenever you talk about the arbitrary award, or you talk about the West, people have this hatred towards the West, which I kind of get and understand, because the West isn't perfect, because the West has done a lot of their own, bad things themselves, toppled governments, the CIA and everything. But the fact that a major country like the United States and other countries had this map drawn out, it was signed, it's in effect. And then you had the Bolshevik revolution, and everything kind of went awry. But this is still that is still in force. So realistically, if you follow international law, those lands are occupied by Turkey.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Absolutely. And today, believe it or not, of all the things, Vic, today is the 102nd anniversary of the Treaty of Moscow that was concluded on March 16, 1921, between the Kemalists and the Bolsheviks. By that treaty, which is illegal because neither the Bolsheviks nor the Kemalists were not recognized as the lawful government of Turkey or Russia. Okay, neither of them were recognized. They just struck a deal. They just struck a treaty by which they gave away Western Armenia, Kars, Ardahan to Turkey de facto. Let the Turks occupy this land. This is exactly March 16. This is the 102nd anniversary today. It's with this illegal treaty, like I said, because according to international law, both sides have to be recognized as sovereign states. Neither the Bolshevik regime nor the Kemalists were recognized.
They were never recognized.
No, they were called bandits by they were called the bandits, outlaws. The lawful Turkish government has signed the arbitral award, and it said thereupon, as soon as President Wilson signs it and puts the Great Seal of the United States, it's going to come into effect. And that's exactly what happened on November 22nd, 1920. And it's still in force. According to the Geneva Convention, arbitral award comes into effect as soon as it's made. But today we have the de facto borders of occupied Armenia according to the illegal Treaty of Moscow. Can you imagine? So the Bolsheviks in Moscow sat with the Kemalists and they decided, okay, these are the borders of Armenia. There weren't even Armenian representatives sitting there.
This makes my conspiracy mind boil right now.
102nd anniversary today, right now.
Yeah. No idea.
It's like squatters coming into your home, creating their own contract and telling you, okay, you can have the small bedroom. Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying.
We don't care what you
and
think.
then give you the smallest bedroom and say you're going to live here.
Like you have the deeds to your own house,
yes.
But two parties, they decide, say, okay, this is my house, this is your room, this is my part. Like,
your neighbor walks in, it's like, okay, you're gonna sleep over there, you're gonna sleep over there. It's like, hey, hold on, who are you right now?
Yeah,
like this is my house. No, we're gonna remodel the place.
Yeah. Oh my God, this is oh.
Can you imagine the level of ignorance? And most of our people still don't know these facts. These are hard facts.
Yeah.
So you talked about how this all went down in 1921. The Kemalists and the Bolsheviks, right?
The occupation and partition of the Republic of Armenia.
So, but there had to have been an Armenian cause that was being discussed by the let's call them what, the Allied powers maybe, or the big powers, whatever, however you want to refer to them as. How was this superseded? How was this superseded over, let's call it, an Armenian cause? Like, how does this make any sense?
Right.
That two factions aren't recognized internationally, or somewhat, I guess.
Well, absolutely. First of all, the United States immediately rejected this, said that, all the succeeding presidents after Wilson, Harding, and others, they pointed out that, the arbitral award is enforced. It's continued. It's occupation of Armenian territory. It's unlawful occupation. Actually, in 1927, even in the Senate, there were some proponents like, like I said, the Bristols, etc. They said, oh, let's establish, diplomatic relations with Turkey. And they tried to push it in the Senate. And it was outright rejected as late as 1927. And the senators there actually cited that the ongoing occupation of Armenia as bestowed by President Woodrow Wilson, those territories of the Republic of Armenia that are occupied by Turkey, is one of the main reasons that we're not going to even establish diplomatic relations with Turkey, because it continues to occupy the lawful territory of the Republic of Armenia. This was rejected by the Senate officially, citing this as the number one reason for doing so, which again was a very important milestone, because it showed that the Armenian cause, after even occupation and partition of Armenia, continued. And remember, on the last program, we even saw images. I mean, Armenian American Armenians, as late as 1940s, 50s, 60s, they were still saying that our land remains occupied.
But at this point, 1927, you're mentioning, at this point, Stalin had gifted those lands to different individuals. So if the Americans... Now this is where my world history mind is coming into play. So if the Americans were rejecting this, were they, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just asking a question because of the timelines. Were the Americans possibly doing this because of the Russians? Were they doing this because of the English? Were they doing this because of some sort of alliance that they had? Or were they genuinely doing this because of the Armenian cause? Because at this, like I said, at this point, Stalin had gifted Nakhichevan to the Azeris, and Azeri became a state, and so on and so forth. We know the history of it. So the Americans rejecting this, what was their reasoning genuine? Was their reasoning because they had an agenda? Would you be able to answer that?
Sure. I think all of the above kind of, Mike, because it wasn't just one thing. I mean, obviously the moral aspect, the legal aspect. And like I said, first of all, it was a matter of prestige for the United States. I mean, like I said, when Wilson took that upon himself, he also, said, I'm going to guarantee that the arbitral award is going to be enforced. That's why he signed it. He put the Great Seal, stating that, it's made to honor the pledges that were given by the Allies, by the United States to the Armenian people. Because in the Paris Peace Conference, they said, absolutely, as a result of the Paris Peace Conference, there's an independent, united, and free Armenia is going to emerge. I mean, that's a pledge that they made. Okay, they had to honor that pledge. It's not just it's official document. It's one of the one of the declarations of the Paris Peace Conference. So the trampling of international law by the Bolsheviks, by Stalin, by Kemal, etc., that was already a bad signal that these maniacal dictatorial powers, they can do whatever they want. They can just trample international law and get away with it. No, that's not how international law works. Look at today.
It was a usurpation.
Even today, exactly. Yeah. So when you say, why did the Americans, push so much for the, and this is a map from the 1920s by Colonel Lawrence Martin, who actually was one of the State Department commission that delimited the border between Republic of Armenia of Turkey. In 1920s, he actually pointed out that these are the territories of Armenia. This is well into 20s and 30s. As you can see, again, stating the borders of Armenia. So, this is important. Even today, if you look at today, just to, compare why a lot of countries are helping Ukraine against Russia, because they're saying if Ukraine fails, if Putin does what he wants, then the whole international law and architecture of international law is going to collapse. Basically, somebody can just walk in, annex a stronger state, can annex its neighbor, take over, and say, "That's it. It's my territory. It's done with."
Yeah.
So it's a very bad precedent. It's gonna lead to
domino effect.
Yeah, domino effect. Other nations are gonna do the same. Okay, so it's a very bad precedent. That's why it's so important. The same thing obviously was true when the arbitral award was made and the bound territory of Armenia was established, Republic of Armenia and Turkey. So that was a driving reason, Mike, and also a number of other reasons, also geopolitical reasons, as you
I'm
said.
sure that, of course,
Because
that
even
there's no the emotion at some point is a fallacy.
Yeah.
There has to be a geopolitical resource driven, whatever the case is.
Yeah.
I can't answer that question, but it has to be something.
Right.
Of course.
Right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Now, what would you say the relationship was in the pursuit of the reformation of the Armenian cause and the Armenian genocide?
Absolutely. Just an important point, like, unfortunately, like I said, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, even 70s, the Armenian cause in itself, it wasn't just the pursuit of the reformation of the Armenian genocide. The orbital award, as we saw those historic photos on the last podcast that we did, always was hand in hand with the pursuit for the reformation of the Armenian genocide. I don't know, at one point, that was maybe in the 1980s or even 1970s, that was kind of dropped, and we started to focus more and more on the reaffirmation of the Armenian genocide. Remember, we even talked about it, even some people were saying recognition of the Armenian genocide, but we talked about that as early as 1951. United States had recognized, was one of the first country to recognize the Armenian genocide as such, using the words Armenian genocide. And Raphael Lemkin, who actually put together the word, he was very instrumental in that. He actually said the Armenian genocide is a textbook example of genocide. And he coined the term genocide, citing the example which motivated him to sort of coin that term, genocide. So he was actually the one who put together the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. And he actually sent, the US government sent to the UN International Court in The Hague, that document citing the recognition of the Armenian genocide by the U.S. government. So even that was wrong, Vic. It was often said it recognition, but we should have used.
But who dropped that? Like what?
That's a good point. I mean, exactly like I said, who introduced the term Eastern Anatolia in these Armenian academics who started repeating one after another, started using it.
Yeah, so again, we're talking about outside forces or sources.
It's very done in such a subtle way that you don't think it's important.
Soft power.
It's subtly, but it's very important. It changes the whole dynamic. If you say occupied Armenia or Western Armenia is different than you say Eastern Anatolia.
Bingo.
Yeah.
There's a political connotation.
Yeah, you introduce a media term that instills, it's a simple term, but an effective term or phrase that embeds in everybody's head.
Yeah.
Oh, occupied so-and-so.
It's not even occupied Western Armenia. It's occupied parts of the Republic of Armenia.
Yeah. And then if you repeat it enough, then it becomes truth.
What I'm saying is, from the Armenian side, especially in the diaspora and stuff, they're the ones who fed to or they were bribed or something happened. Something happened for them all of a sudden to change and all of a sudden call it the recognition of the Armenian genocide. Right? So somebody was paid off.
Right.
In a subtle way.
Of these so-called contacts, you see these Turkish academics, Turkish politicians, they have this dialogue with the Armenian side, with so-called Armenian elites. They're pushing things. It's happening.
Yeah.
It's not like it just happened out of nowhere. I mean, we have evidence in past years with the football diplomacy, the soccer diplomacy, all this stuff. Even before the soccer. Turkish-Armenian Reconciliation Commission. Now, even today, as you can see, the present government is like, in dialogue.
Yeah, in dialogue.
In dialogue with the country that in 2020, they were behind killing our, boys with the Bayraktars.
Dropping bombs with their drones.
I mean, that's okay. Yeah. But, we forgot that. That's not important.
What is, moving forward a little bit in the timeline, what is the relationship between the right of the Armenians of Artsakh, speaking about the Artsakh region, and to, let's call it self-determination and the Armenian question?
Absolutely. So again, setting the record straight, there's so many things. Like, we have to realize that the issue of Artsakh that we're facing today is direct result and continuation of the Armenian question. Okay. It's not just out of hap chance that the Artsakh issue is ongoing today, out of nowhere, and we just started talking about. No, it began, as we know. Remember, we talked about illegally Stalin placed 90+% Armenian populated Artsakh within Soviet Azerbaijan, which was not an independent state. Okay, Artsakh has never been part of an independent Azerbaijan. That was USSR or at that time Soviet Azerbaijan, which was not recognized internationally. Okay, later on was part of the USSR. So Artsakh was part of the USSR, but as an independent country, it was never part of independent Azerbaijan. Never has been. Illegally, Stalin placed it as an administrative bond. And it was against international law, because League of Nations pointed out in 1920 that those territories, and we even saw a British map of the Republic of Armenia on its eastern frontiers, including Artsakh, okay, all the way to Ganzak, that those territories of...
it's a great picture.
This is the Eintop resistance. I didn't talk about that, but that's okay. 1920, 21.
I'm just going through the pictures as you're talking.
This is the Eintop resistance.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have a chance later on one day to dedicate
that's
podcast.
A big gun.
Yeah.
He was a gunsmith making guns for the Eintop fighters. Yeah. I wanted to point out that even when Armenia was occupied, there was a great resistance from Syunik, from one point of Armenia to Eintop.
Yeah.
Armenia, like near the Mediterranean, from mountains of Syunik to same year, 21. Nezhde was fighting there in Eintop. Armenians were resisting the Kemalists. These Armenians in Syunik against the Bolshevik Tatars, and Eintop Armenians against Kemalists.
I didn't mean to, sidetrack you from what you were saying. I'm just showing the slides that we have. But continue with the Artsakh situation.
But
go back to the Artsakh.
Artsakh is big. This is Smyrna, 1922, and like when they killed off. They killed off 10,000 Armenians and tens of thousands of Greeks in Smyrna, and erased the Armenian corridor of Smyrna. This is actually one of early color photo made by a French photographer, late 1922. And this is Nezhde. We know, all of us know Nezhde. You're going to do podcast on him. So obviously, this is Nezhde in United States. Of all the things, he was the great champion of the Armenian cause. Just wanted to include this rare color.
Yeah, there was the man right there in color. I've
seen this photo.
Yeah,
in color. There he is.
Yeah, that's an early color photo. And speaking of Artsakh, even back in 1988, when Armenians started this democratic movement, we were pointing out, you see there's a fork, it says Stalin in Armenian, and he basically like chops off parts of United Armenia. He's like chops part of Nakhichevan, gives it to Turkey like a cake. Chops off Artsakh and gives it to... This is from 1988, actual poster during the Artsakh movement that Armenians were using. Yeah. So even back then, we knew that the Artsakh question is closely related to the Armenian question, to Stalin, to the Kemalists, to the Armenian genocide. Yeah. And it's integral part of the Armenian question and the Armenian cause.
Yeah. Well,
I love these.
I mean, it's such a heavy topic. There's so much to process. But what would you say should serve as the main platform for the pursuit of the Armenian cause, and let's say a just resolution,
right.
of the Armenian question that we've talked about in the last 2 hours, in today's movement, today's fight that we're everybody, at least everybody who cares about our motherland, Hamidian, what would you say that would be?
Absolutely, Vic. That's a great question. Well, as we talked about in the last few hours, like we have to put everything in its proper context. Like we have to realize that even our ongoing, what the issues that we're facing today, be it in Artsakh, Sunni, what is going on today, that's also sort of in continuation of the unresolved, unsettled Armenian question. So what happened back in 19th century? What happened with the Armenian internationalization of the Armenian question in 1878? The Armenian Genocide, the arbitral award of President Wilson, the Armenian cause today, the Armenian cause today is basically our fight to solve the Armenian question on just terms, on Armenian terms. The solution for the Armenian question, the Turkish solution, is extermination of the Armenians, extermination of Armenia. So we have to decide for ourselves what path are we willing to take and continue. Is there going to be a Turkish solution to the Armenian question? Or there's going to be an Armenian just solution of the Armenian question?
By Armenians.
By Armenians.
Yeah.
This is the ultimate question, because what is happening today in Artsakh, what is happening today in Sunni, we know that it's like 95th, 96th day of the blockade of Artsakh, right?
Yeah.
Our borders are being attacked. We're constantly threatened. Why? It's again the same actors. The so-called Azeris, as tools of Turkey, are doing all of this. So it seems nothing.
While trying to make relations good again on this side. I mean, you have them attacking from this side and pretending that they're about to open borders and this and that, and
they're basically what it's saying is they're lulling us into this complacency and sleep.
Trap. It's a trap.
It's infiltration without firing a single shot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just this is the thing. So, like we talked about in the last podcast, even today, we have the legal, the diplomatic, even beyond that. I mean, our people have to realize the diplomatic and the legal front, the arbitral award is just one front. We have to also fight on that front. But at the same time, we have to, of course, strengthen Armenia. Of course, we have to unify the Armenian communities around Armenia. This is also the enemy is constantly sowing seeds of discord, division, breaking up Armenian unity. All of this is being done, believe it or not.
What would you say to the Armenians in the diaspora and even in Armenia that are, I don't want to use the word careless, but I feel like they're asleep. That they're going on with their lives as far as, their daily, Iran's kefeda, everything will work itself out, or that idea that's floating around. What can we do? We're such a small country. Russia's our father, or this, that. Like, what would you say to these Armenians? What message would you give them to make them realize how dire this situation is, and to how they should wake up and take this seriously?
Well, I mean, we have to realize that oftentimes you would hear these Armenians saying like, blame, like you just earlier you said, West was at fault. Then you have other folks, obviously they're saying, Russia, Putin is at fault, etc. I mean, it's for the latter, it's of course it's true, but at the end of the day, we have to take responsibility for what is happening to us. So, obviously what we have been doing did not work, hasn't worked. We have to change our strategy. We have to totally overhaul our strategy as a nation, as a people. And even like ordinary Armenians as individuals, they have to change. We have to realize that we can't just constantly blame others for our woes. We have to take responsibility for our shortcomings. Like you said, like, you know, for example, like what you guys are doing, like, I mean, I can bring other examples. You guys need support, okay? At the end of the day, all of the listeners have to support you guys, because this is not only about Armenian history, Armenian past, Armenian heritage. This is not, we're talking about something that is in the past. This is actually very much connected what is going on today. This is connected with our future. What future are we going to have? You know,
if we're going to have
it. So I hope our fellow Armenians, at least those that support and listen, they realize how important it is what we're talking about. We're basically outlining a course, suggestions. You know, this is what has to be done. We're pointing out all of this, but at the end of the day, you need that support. Armenians have to rally around you guys and other such noble causes, that we can succeed, because the enemy is working night and day to basically hurt us,
with a lot of
damage
money,
us, and destroy us.
Yeah.
So like constant, like you have to understand, like, okay, like what you say, the kef is maybe not a bad thing. Party.
No. What I'm
not saying don't party, but at the end of the day, look what our nation is facing. What our people are facing.
What I mean by that, listen, everybody needs to let loose. We have family gatherings, you have birthdays. This doesn't mean stop doing that. But what I'm saying is, like, there's this weird, like, I feel like people forgot what happened. And they're just like, continue going. I'm not saying there's you know, sit in sadness constantly and worry. You can't be like that. That's not being productive. But what I'm saying is, like, I feel like they don't care. They don't care. They're just continuing, like, they need to do something. Everybody, like, we've mentioned this so many times. Everybody can make a difference in their own way. There's always a way. I hate that.
Start a podcast.
Yeah, call it something else, though.
Yes, don't call it this.
What I'm saying is, like, people always say, oh, well, what can I, who am I? What can I? No, you can do a lot. There's so many ways you can help. That doesn't mean that, you know, just because you're not involved in some organization or you can't help. Trust me, there are many ways.
Many ways
that you can do something. Because if you have 10 million Armenians in the world and everybody's doing something towards this Armenian cause for the Armenian question, then you are unstoppable. There you go. Perfect. So I just hope people who are listening to us,
a million people to watch us, we are unstoppable,
can wake up and realize how important this is. And again, what we're doing here is such a small portion of education we're trying to give to the generation.
I'm going to say something about the American Revolution. A lot of people don't realize. You know me. I've dove into American history just as a nerd for myself. During the time of the American Revolution, you had the 13 colonies. More or less a population of about 15 to 20 million people that had migrated here from different parts of the world, right? It only took, statistically speaking, about 5% of those people to stand up against the Redcoats.
Yeah.
The Redcoats. We all know what happened.
Yeah.
Right? 5% of 15 to 20 million people that occupied the 13 colonies. Arrest my case.
Yeah.
So now we've got what, 10, 11 millions Armenians around the world? Do the math.
Yeah.
Do the math. That's all I'm saying.
Well, hopefully,
that's all it takes.
Yes. Hopefully, sooner than later. It's time. Everybody needs to wake up. Should we say this concludes the topic of Armenian question as far as this episode?
For now.
For now. Next week, you're going to be back again, and we're going to be talking about the Armenian American, which all this, the reason why we're doing this is all tie in together. And then a week after that, we'll have our event. Speaking of our event, guys, again, I want to mention this. Our first panel discussion event will be at the AGBU Arts Center in Pasadena. The topic is exploring the cradle of civilization with Dr. Georg Nazarian, and obviously you've heard him here. You know, that panel talk is obviously a different topic, but to hear this great man give you all this knowledge and everything he knows, it's amazing. So again, we encourage you guys to please buy your tickets, come join us. There'll be a meet and greet. We have a social hour. We're going to be serving drinks, food, and it's just going to be a great event. It's a Thursday night. Bring your kids if they're of age and they can understand this information we're going to be providing. Join us. Bring your kids, and we hope to see you all on March 30th.
I promise, if you ask Gevork a question, he probably has an answer to it. And if he doesn't,
he'll point you to the person who has it.
Amazing answer. That guy knows.
That guy knows.
But he probably won't because he has the answer.
Yeah. So, besides that, what else? Did I miss anything?
Oh, man. No.
All right. Well, we
covered it.
Yeah, we're about 2.5 hours into the podcast. This will be up tomorrow on all major podcast platforms. Those of you who listen to us, I want to thank you guys. I love seeing the numbers go up, the downloads go up, the countries. It's amazing. And those of you who are listening to us in Turkey and Azerbaijan, thank you. I personally want to thank you because it tells me that at least they're listening.
Yeah.
And
we're speaking the truth. If you're ready for the truth, hey, we don't hate you at the end of the day.
No, we don't.
So besides that, follow us on Instagram at Medhedosnej. If you guys want to support us, we've mentioned before, there's 2 ways to do this. You can go on patreon.com/Medhedosnej, become a Patreon. It starts at $5 a month. Or you can become a member on YouTube. There's a membership button. It starts at $2.99. All these, when you support us, we take these and put it back into the show, and also all the great stuff we're working out, especially the animation, the Forgotten Thrones. I've mentioned that before. Everything's going great.
A lot of stuff.
A lot of things are happening. We're just not announcing it because it's a little bit premature, but it's happening. And support us by getting our sculptures. Again, I mentioned April 1st, guys, the prices are going up. We have to, because our manufacturing cost has gone up, and it's not their fault. It's because of materials. So use this opportunity. If you ever wanted to have any of our sculptures, go get them today and use the promo code Artsakh, and you will save 10%, and we'll match that and give it to support our heroes who will be at the event with us on the 30th. Thursday, 8 p.m. So, having said that, Georg, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. We'll see you next week. And those of you who are live with us on the chats, thank you for your comments, your questions. We enjoy
awesome.
We're watching you guys. We see it. And
I respond to a lot of them, man.
Yeah. I know.
I jump into the crowd, bro.
You're handling
I jump into the mosh pit.
I'm producing the show. You're handling the chat. So, as we always say at the end of the show, respect one another.
Love one another.
Until the next episode, take care of yourselves.